Hello and welcome to the fourth session of communication. Today, we are going to be focusing on one of the most important facets or aspects of communication, and that is your listening skills. Now, listening is the ability to accurately receive and interpret messages in the communication process. Listening is key to all effective communication. Without the ability to listen effectively, messages are easily misunderstood. As a result, communication breaks down and the sender of the message can become frustrated or irritated. If there is one communication skill that you should aim to master, then listening is it. It is one of the most important skills, as has been previously said. Now, there are, of course, purposes of listening that are different. There are four purposes that we are going to list down for our session today. Listening for appreciation, listening for comprehension, listening to show support, and critical listening. When you listen for appreciation, you are basically listening in order to understand what the other person is saying and to appreciate what the other person is saying. It could be a simple matter of someone boasting about some accomplishment that they have just performed. All you are expected to do, of course, is congratulate them and smile in their direction. That is what you mean by listening for appreciation. When you listen for comprehension, you are trying to understand what the person is saying and hopefully give some sort of positive feedback. Then there is listening to show support. It could be something that has gone wrong in another person's life. It could be the death of a relative or a loved one. We will be talking about this later. But you're expected to show support and show that you care. And of course, the last and the most important one for students especially is critical listening. This is the type of listening that you do when you are sitting in class, where you are expected to actively interact with the teacher and expected to react in an appropriate manner. Anyway, let us move on to the 6 effective techniques of becoming an active listener. If you take a look at the image that has been shown to you, you will see that there are 6 steps. I'll just run through them for once. The first one says pay attention. The second says withhold judgment. The third advocates patience. The fourth talks about body language. Then you have something known as restating, which we shall be talking about. And finally, questions. So let's take a look at these 6 effective techniques one by one. The first one is rather simple. It says, pay attention. Give your undivided attention to the person speaking and do not be distracted by anything else. Be intentionally engaged in the conversation and show the respect that the other person deserves. If you need a moment to be ready, or if you're disturbed by something else, ask for a minute to finish up whatever you're doing before shifting your attention to the other person. This sends a positive signal by showing that you really care about what he or she has to say. Make a conscious effort to clear your mind first and to disregard any form of distracting thoughts. Focus on what the other person is trying to say and pick up subtle signals from the body language as well as the tone of the other person's voice. It also helps if you mentally keep a note of what are the key points of the conversation. Remember what Stephen Covey said. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. Most people listen with the intent to reply. Of course, it's not bad to listen with an intent to reply, but stage 1 should always be to just listen, right? One common mistake we tend to make is to be fixated on questions in our minds while waiting for the appropriate moment to jump back into the conversation. Instead, it may be a better idea to just digest and empathize with what is being said before you come up with a response. Yeah, sometimes no one is looking for answers. People are just looking for a way in which they can vent their emotions, and you are just there to be the listener, without the feedback, without the critical input. So just be there and listen. That's very, very important. Stage 2 is to withhold judgment. Now, we judge what other people say all the time. It could be because of the way they speak. It could be because of differences in views that we might have with them, or that we just don't know them well enough, especially when we've just met them. It's best to avoid this natural tendency and to be more accepting and open-minded to what the other person has to say, rather than, and mind you this, imposing your own interpretation on what is being said, right? So do not have any kind of judgment. Do not have any kind of prejudice in your mind as you listen to other people speak. The third point is patience. I presume we all know what that is. Never interrupt somebody or try and finish their sentences for them. It may come across as impolite and condescending, and it disrupts the other person's train of thought. Be patient and keep quiet so that you can give the other person time to gather his or her thoughts and finish what they intended to say. Learn to give up control and give the speaker as much time as necessary as a sign of respect. Fourth is body language. Be present in the conversation by giving the other person positive feedback using some of the ways in which we can use body language. Eye contact, very important. Look at the other person with a comfortable gaze and avoid looking bored or staring intently. Yeah, looking bored ensures that the other person feels disturbed and thinks that he or she is overstepping a bound or talking too much. And when you stare intently, it can also make the other person unknowingly very, very conscious. And so avoid both of these things. Posture, also important. Face the other person. Lean forward slightly. Avoid slouching or resting your head on one hand, which indicates disinterest. Be positive. Smile to show interest and to affirm what the other person has to say, and avoid looking bored. This has been mentioned multiple times. Pay attention to that. Nod your head to show approval or acknowledgement. Use encouraging words like yes or okay to show that you're still a part of the conversation. Very important. Point number 5 is restating. Make it a habit to restate or rephrase what the other person has said to confirm your understanding and to give them the feeling of being heard. It may be that they didn't really mean what they said, and this gives them the opportunity to clarify things or to further elaborate on what they meant. You can also use this method to refocus the conversation to a specific point that you may be keen to discuss upon slightly more. So restating is also a very good idea of realizing that you are on the same page as the person who is speaking. Point number 6 is questions. The questions that you ask determine the right kind of answer that hopefully you will receive. It's important to ask the right questions and to use different types of questions depending on what you want to know. Be careful, for example, of asking closed and leading questions, as they leave very little room for real answers. However, they could be useful for encouraging action. Now, what are closed or leading questions? If you ask things like, are you ready, right, to face whatever it is that you're facing? It's going to be a yes or a no, correct? But after yes or no, if you push the person a little forward, the person might be willing to elaborate. On the other hand, asking open-ended questions usually invites a more thoughtful response, and it allows the other person to express themselves more freely. Let people elaborate on what it is that is there in their minds. This is helpful. Now, what are the examples of this kind of an open-ended question? What was that like? Or how did that feel? Tell me more about it. What do you mean by this? All the responses to this are going to reveal what the speaker really thinks, and therefore these kind of questions are encouraged. Asking effective questions will lead to better dialogue, give you the chance to continue gaining information for a better context. Additionally, there are two types of open-ended questions. Now, this is interesting: ascending and descending. Ascending questions relate to values and aspirations, right? They point towards the future. Example, what are you looking for in your work? Or what motivates you to do this? And descending questions relate to what has already been done, the past, and of course, something which is concrete fact. For example, how were last year's sales, or how did your vacation go? Both of these equally important in their own place. Now, we all know that listening also comes with its own barriers. There are different types of barriers to listening, and we're going to take a look at some of them shortly. A barrier to listening is anything that physically or philologically hinders you, stops you from recognizing, understanding, and accurately interpreting the message that you are receiving. For this course, we are going to look at 5 major barriers to effective listening. The first one, which is rather a typical one, which students encounter at all times, is called information overload. 70% of our waking time is spent in some sort of communication situation. Of that 70%, 45% of time is spent in listening. With all we have to listen to, there are going to be times when we experience what is called information overload. This is when you have so much information coming at you that it's easy to become overwhelmed. In a public speaking class, for example, you can experience this when listening to your fellow classmates give speeches, especially if you're hearing 20 or 30 speeches one after the other. You become overwhelmed and you'll probably find yourself tuning out at some point in time. This also happens when you have consecutive lectures. Yeah, after a while, your brain just stops functioning. Or what if a speaker condenses so many statistics, so many points into a presentation that you cannot keep track of all of them? That is called information overload. The second obstacle is going to be personal issues or personal concerns. Let's face it, we all have a lot that is going on in life. Most of you attend college, some of you might be working, others could be raising a family. And all of us have our own personal issues to work through every single day. Sometimes when we are absorbed in our own thoughts and concerns, we can't focus on what someone else is saying. Your role as a listener, as an audience member, is to listen to what the speaker is saying. If you find yourself focusing on your own upcoming speech rather than listening to your classmates or your teacher, you're allowing your personal concerns to distract you. Or perhaps you're worried about something happening at work or at home. When you allow those worries to take over your focus, you will often find yourself becoming a less effective listener. Then, of course, point number 3, and I think we've all experienced this, especially with working from home, outside distractions. In college, it could be classroom doors slamming, cell phones ringing, students having conversations outside the hall, etc. At home, it could be other people who talk, a TV that is on, somebody else who's talking on the phone. We know all these distractions. Now, it is your job to check out the speaking situations before you present. That way, you expect some of the above mentioned outside distractions. So you need to do a recce and figure out how the situation is before you actually enter any conversation. If you have a good idea of what to expect, you can adjust your volume, pace, pitch, and tone of your speech. If you're an audience member, you can move hopefully to another seat, right? Close the door of a room if you have the space, and do whatever is necessary to minimize the distractions. Distractions play a very huge role in ensuring that you are a bad listener, and therefore keep away from distractions. Then, of course, something that we've mentioned before, prejudice. Sometimes you might have a hard time listening because you do not agree with the speaker. We as humans have a tendency to be closed-minded at times. If you have an emotional reaction to a speaker, or if you agree or disagree with his or her ideas on a personal level, mind you, it's no longer professional now, you're getting involved or overly involved. You might allow personal prejudices to distract you. Keep an open mind. It's easier said than done, but try. While you may not agree with the speaker, his or her message may be valid, and you'll never know unless you hear them out. And so give everybody a fair hearing. Do not be prejudiced. Try. Next, we come to the rate of speech and thought. Yeah, the rate is the speed at which people speak. Now, most people speak at a rate of 125 words per minute. As a listener, you are able to filter 700 words a minute. That's a lot. If we can process so many more words than what we actually hear, a mental lag can occur. You are distracted, right? Because the stimulus that is being provided to you is not enough to keep you engaged. Eventually, you'll stop listening or you'll find yourself drifting in and out. It might be to your benefit to mentally summarize the speaker's ideas from time to time in order to keep yourself engaged, right? But understand that drifting in and out is normal and natural, and try your best to stay in the moment with the speaker. We're moving on now to something known as academic listening, right? This is listening to lectures, something that you're doing right now. When you attend lectures, you need to apply the highest level of listening skills that you have. Not only do you have to listen to your professors expounding abstract and sophisticated concepts, but you also have to be effective in taking notes that will help you with learning the topics covered in the lecture. Thus, daily listening comprehension that suffices for most interactions is not enough in a lecture. You need to stretch beyond that. The following steps or stages will go a long way in ensuring effectivity in academic listening. First of all, evaluate information. While listening to your teachers talk, you need to be able to identify which parts are important enough to be noted down. You need to make notes, running notes as they're called. Secondly, organize information. Even when you write, you need to capture the relationships being presented between ideas and concepts. Your notes need to have clarity. They cannot be jumbled bits of writing on a sheet of paper. It doesn't work. Predict information. Being able to anticipate how the information that comes up connects with what has been presented so far can enhance your ability to understand the lecture. So pay attention to these things. Moving on to tips on note-taking. 8 points which are very important. Do not write down each word. It's not important that every word that the teacher utters is important. Decide what is important. Okay? Be an active listener and reader. Use symbols and abbreviations. Don't try to write down words as they are. Use your own short forms. Use colors. Now, this is usually a good idea when there is a lot of information coming in. Right, colorful notes make the notes more engaging and you want to go back and read them again. Revise your notes as soon as possible. Once you're done with your classes, go over the notes when the information is still fresh in your brain. You might want to add certain points that you've missed out while taking down notes. Be consistent. At the beginning of every college and school year, we decide that this year we're going to study hard, that this year we'll be regular, that this year we'll take down notes. Don't forget that. Right? Let that habit continue throughout your academic sessions. And most importantly, improve your handwriting. Most of us are going to be giving written exams at a certain point of time in life. Even when you're writing notes down, please ensure that your handwriting is legible so that later on, when you come back to your own notes, you're able to read what you've written. Right? And this, again, is very, very important. Thank you so much. I'll see you again in the next session.